Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show, also sometimes Russian and Chinese a little bit there, depends. My name is Sasha Star, and we have our wonderful guest, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you as always. Unfortunately, Ivan couldn't make it today, but being in Kiev, Ukraine.
Yeah, he's a little occupied with staying out of the way of trouble.
I know. No, he'll join us next Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. So, Jonathan, a lot of things are happening right now. Of course, all eyes on the upcoming summit of NATO in Vilnius, Lithuania, on 11th, 12th of July. And what I've just noticed that President of Ukraine, Zelensky, said that there is no reason for him even to attend this summit unless some breakthrough regarding Ukraine will happen there. Jonathan, what's your view on that statement?
Well, I can see their point because Kiev, Ukrainians are still pushing, waiting for the right time to make the big commitment of their reserves in their counteroffensive. And they're looking for decisive results on the battlefield so that they have more of a justification for a NATO summit and have a stronger position. NATO is still, as I understand, equally from their standpoint, still somewhat cautious while they are waiting for the outcome of the counteroffensive. They are cautiously optimistic, but one could understand why both parties in this on the subject are relatively reluctant to commit to attending the summit. And Kiev is saying that it's not really productive at this time.
There's something else. What interesting is that the position of Kiev towards the war and its results is very clear. They want to get Russian occupiers all out of Ukrainian territory. It doesn't guarantee the peace after even that would be achieved, but at least that's a call to achieve this and then go to next stage, whether it will be membership in NATO or some other treaties or whatever it might be. Now, NATO and United States, or both, in my opinion, doesn't have that defined goals that are to be achieved. I think unspoken goal is to weaken Russia to such degree from military point of view, economically and otherwise, so it will never even think about any attack against anybody for the next 50, maybe 100 years, which is not such a bad goal, right? Unfortunately, it doesn't overlaps with Ukrainian goal. Well, it overlaps to a certain degree, but not fully, right? So this is why, for example, in my opinion, the reason that ATACMS and F-16s are not given to Ukraine in a large quantities is that the war will be over very quickly, and that will not allow to restrain Russia, and if it will be slowly but surely defeated. So I saw some, especially with the latest Prigozhin affair. I've seen some calculations how much is being paid for a single day of war just by Prigozhin group, Wagner. But if you're talking about all Russian army, then you have to multiply that amount 1,000 times over 5,000 dollars. I'm not so sure, and that becoming incredible burden on Russia and its economy, its society, and so on. So Putin proved to be very weak in this affair with Prigozhin, and some people believe that it's not the end of it. So, how to reconcile all that in the Vilnius upcoming NATO summit to sort of make sure that, of course, I think that regardless of what he says, Zelensky will attend the summit. Let's work from this perspective, most likely. And what do you think could be done on that NATO to, let's say, stand together? Let's put it this way.
Well, in order to show continued demonstration of NATO standing together behind Ukraine, yeah, they simply need to accelerate the delivery of the decisive arms that Kiev is requesting. This is right now the one thing. Kiev is making incremental progress across a broad front, and they are waiting, in my opinion, for the decisive moment where they can launch their an operational breakthrough, which would, at the very least, isolate Crimea from Russia, and set the stage for the retaking of Crimea once they are cut off from supply and reinforcement. So, right now, it's a very delicate balancing act, and the both sides are committing a large amount of resources, and it is not something which can be easily called. I would like to point out, by the way, there was a recent analysis I saw yesterday where this one analyst, and I will not name them, but they were contending that this whole coup was staged, a deliberate staging as a part of a larger deception operation, engineered by Putin, believe it or not, in order to strengthen Russian support for the war, to convince the Russian people that this is going to be a long war. And the one way to galvanize Russian support is to terrify the Russian people of two things: chaos, threaten them with domestic chaos if this failed coup succeeded, and and a threat of invasion from the West. Two things that are guaranteed, at least in the Russian perception, from the Russian leadership's perception, to increase domestic support for a foreign military adventure. Now, this is really this is kind of far-fetched. That Putin would be so clever in engineering this elaborate staged coup, but at the same time, he's made so many blunders up to this point that all of a sudden he's going to turn deceptively brilliant. I'm sorry, that's a little much for me to interpret. The point of the matter is, yeah, I'll lose a few 100,000 soldiers, but it's all worth it. No, sometimes one of the hardest things to assess as an intelligence analyst is when your opponent is either doing or is about to do something stupid. We all assume that there is purpose and logic and planning. It's sort of a rational actor assumption. We assume that, and we often, as part of the mirror imaging fallacy, we project our own logic onto the opponent, and assuming that he's smarter than he really is. So I'm a little, I'm a little skeptical of Western analysts who say that this is all part of a major deception operation. It's costing an awful lot just for a mere deception. So still, Russia as They are on the defensive. They are, and I still contend that Ukraine is following exactly the right course. That they are marshaling their resources, conserving them for the right moment to throw the decisive punch and achieve an operational breakthrough, which will give Ukraine a much stronger negotiating position, and really put it to Putin, and you give him very little alternative.
Jonathan, there is a saying, follow the money. Let's follow the money. So the expenditure of Wagner Group were in billions of dollars, not even hundreds of millions, but in billions of dollars. If you will add just salaries, what are being say 25,000 people, although before Bakhmut his army was around 70,000 people. So they lost some. It happens in the war. So now it's 25,000. Okay, but 25,000 they are being paid say $5,000 a month, and it's only fighters, the commanders, and so on. They're paying 10,000 and more. Okay, it's just salary, and then the supplies, the food. They have to provide some accommodation for them, or whatever it could be. We are talking about enormous amounts of money. And guess what? Putin, in his speech, aftermath of the Prigozhin affair, he says that they were paid by the Russian government. And the last transfer was 85 billion rubles. It's an enormous amount of money. It's still 85 billions. It's about $100 million, just one transfer. Uh, the There was the car, I think so, some kind of minibus or something belongs to Wagner, was found with $4 billion rubles cash right there. What is this cash? Why do they need so much cash? To pay their soldiers, to maybe bribe some of the people in Rostov, which they were taken without any resistance whatsoever. And Rostov is a strategic military city that actually controls everything what's happening in Ukraine. The Russian army is concerned. So they take in Rostov, which supports your theory or your friend's theory, that there was all prearranged show. Because how could they take without even a single shot? They could take Rostov, and from there on, actually there was some resistance in Voronezh, where they went after Rostov. But still, some attacks by military planes and helicopters, they were all shot down. They killed 20 or so Russian highly trained star pilots. And
Mighty elaborate measures for so-called deception.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to say it mildly, I think Putin himself is a traitor. If he was denying before, just 3 months ago, he was saying that Wagner is a private group. And now when he outlawed these private military groups, yet he admits that he just paid a few days ago 85 billion rubles to something what should not be supported by states. And actually it's against the state laws even to have this group. Not only it exists and exists quite successfully, but it's getting paid by this Russian. So there were analyses of Prigozhin operations in Africa, and they're corrupting local governments and providing training to their military groups and overall military. And they are making huge amounts of money from diamonds trade and gold and other resources. So one could think that this profit in Africa from these resources financing the Wagner group which is fighting in Ukraine. Not so, because the major part of these resources going to Putin and his friends. And in return, financing to Wagner is providing not by Putin and his friends who got the money from Africa. No, it's coming from Russian state. So Russian people who are suffering from horrible living conditions, they don't have even enough food, they're subsidizing the private military group, which is against the law in Russia, like everywhere else. So this is what really Putin, he has a pure mafia state in Russia. There is no laws. It's a mafia and all this affair. Some other pundits, they're saying that all this affair about money. The Prigozhin didn't get as much money from Putin as they agreed, and he just came over to get his money. That's all the purpose of this trip to Moscow. And based on what, and this is, of course, Putin cannot recognize it, although I'm surprised what an idiot he is even to say that he, as a state, supplied 85 billion rubles. That is a crime in itself, and I'm surprised nobody was asking Putin to say that. So he was saying that as his defense, that Prigozhin, he's asking me that I owe him money. No, I don't owe him any money. I just paid 85 billion rubles. I don't owe any money to Prigozhin. So Prigozhin is not right to come into Moscow and asking, demanding payment of my money to him because I don't owe him anything. This is what we are witnessing right now. We are witnessing a failed state. We must keep that in mind, helping Ukraine to get rid of this horrible mafia state like creature. We have to bury it. And that's the only thing what will guarantee a peaceful existence for all planet, because everything what's happening on this planet, all the wars, uprising, and everything else, it's coming and engineered by Russia. And finally, it's about time to get rid of this. Russian state has to go. The country has to consist of viable territorial or national units, like territorial, I'm talking about, for example, Ural. It should have its own republic. It doesn't need Moscow. Ural has, and same as national states like Tatarstan or Bashkirstan and others, Yakutia, for example, they have enough natural resources that they can live a very, very uh, good standard of living just using the resources. They don't need Moscow, because what's happening right now, all the money is being sucked from republics, from territories, from everywhere else. To do what? Finance Putin's war so his generals will get more stars and they will grab more and more goods from Ukraine. This is a pure imperialistic war. It's a pure nationalistic war, because it's, right now there is a genocide of Ukrainian people. And all it's done by one little idiot that has to go ASAP. Jonathan, what would you like to add, if any?
Well, one thing I would like to add is that if Russia, as a failed state, does in fact eventually collapse as a result of this war, then we are trading one problem for another. We are not, I would disagree with you somewhat that this solves all problems. If Russia collapses and disintegrates into its component republics, then China will be able to step in and exploit that power vacuum, or basically expand its influence and occupation at Russia's expense, or the former Russia's expense. And so we will have to deal eventually with an expanded influence of China over the prostrate form of Russia as a failed state. So now you have it's trading one problem for another, admittedly. So now we have to worry about mainly reconstructing Ukraine and rebuilding it and strengthening it so that it is a fully viable member of NATO and the European Union, And our strategic problem will be economic reconstruction of Ukraine, as well as military fortification. So that is going to be the chief challenge, and that is, Russia collapsing as a state does not solve the world's problems. It removes one source of them, but it strengthens another source, which we will have to deal with in the years and decades to come.
Jonathan, but think about it. The influence of China in today's Russia is very large, to say so. It's probably even it would require even more aggressive configurations than what I just proposed. Now, if Russia indeed will be replaced by, say, I think at least 8 or could be as many as 18 districts. So China's influence now will be split between whatever the new countries will be there, whether 8, 18 or 45. It doesn't really matter so much. What naturally will happen that those regions which are close enough geographically to Russia, okay, they will be controlled. I don't think that China will try to colonize these new republics, but it will have a very, very close ties to it, and of course will try to use to their advantage, and why not? But there will be also advantages for the republics of dealing with China. Now, those territories which will be farther from China, I think they will most likely ally themselves with the West, maybe even with post-war Ukraine. That remains to be seen, and I don't think there will be too many years until we will see it. At least I'm doing exercises and on diet, trying to live to the day when Putin will be gone and the normal Russia will exist. So I'm an optimistic person, and I'm trying to get there. Jonathan, one question to you. On the previous program, there was a populist author who was claiming that Bush Sr., he gave his word to Russia that it will not increase the membership of NATO. And since that was derailed, and many more members of NATO happened in the late 90s and 2000s. So Putin has his grievances that United States did not keep its word. I argued with him that even if that's true and Bush gave such a promise, that is 100% invalid simply because he is just president of one of the members of NATO. And he could not say, regardless what are his real thoughts were at the time, that NATO will not move eastward. Because what's the mechanism, the way I understand it, is that the new country, let's say Poland, back 25 years ago or so, let's say Poland, after collapse of Soviet Union and so on, they decided that for their security, it would be a good idea to join NATO. Who knows? So Poland applied for NATO membership. So NATO could say, Poland, out, you will never be accepted to NATO. However, what NATO did, they started a process of acceptance of Poland, but there were several conditions that Poland had to agree and implement before it would become full-fledged. So it was a procedure which took a few years, okay? So now what, according to Putin, when Poland applied to become a member of NATO, so Bush was no longer in power. So United States could have said, well, look, our former President Bush promised that such and such thing will not happen. Therefore, we will disagree to membership of Poland in NATO, and therefore Poland wouldn't be able to join the NATO, right? So there is no NATO or Poland's fault that Poland indeed became member of NATO. So if any fault for anything of what happened is United States of America. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that? Maybe you can
There
elaborate.
was a considerable, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Eastern European members of what was formerly the Warsaw Pact, they all knew, for example, about the Warsaw Pact's war plans to use up to 300 nuclear weapons against NATO in the event of war. And so this explains why not only these former Warsaw Pact members wanted to join NATO, but they also wanted to have nuclear weapons stationed on their territory. They wanted to have even U.S. troops stationed on their territory as a guarantee against future Russian aggression. So there's another dynamic operating here. The former Eastern European members of the Warsaw Pact did not want to have anything to do with a future Russian attempt to recreate the former Soviet empire. So you have all of these people, all these nations with a built-in incentive to join NATO. And so it's not all one it's not a one-sided grab on the part of the US leadership or NATO or the NATO organization to expand. There was a power vacuum, and quite naturally the US and NATO were simply responding to a power vacuum, and they quite naturally filled it. And it was, as we can see, it has expanded eastward, and Russia's own tendency towards trying to restore the former glories of Russia, that has worked against them.
Uh,
So Putin has no one. That has no one. Putin has no one to blame but himself. And
Jonathan, I'd like to just mention that obviously there is no fault of Poland, which genuinely wanted to
no,
join. There is no fault of NATO, which never gave any promises to anybody, and they
yeah,
accepted their application, and it went through a very rigorous process, and finally Poland joined NATO. But United States is very interesting position. Of course, United States went along with NATO, and therefore Poland was accepted. However, if indeed Bush gave these promises, now I don't understand the nature of the promises. What they had a few whiskeys with Gorbachev or Yeltsin, and he said something over the table, eating black caviar, and say, "Oh, my friend, don't worry about NATO," or so on. It's one form. If it's a written agreement that the United States, for certain period of time, let's say 5 years, 10 years, 55 years, but there has to be a time limitation because it cannot go forever for 5,000 years, that the United States will not allow any new members in NATO. That's absurd. So if that's so,
they're hoping that NATO would shackle itself. The United States would shackle its own expansion, when quite clearly you had a former opposition alliance that is clearly disintegrated, and it would have been, as you say, it would have been unnatural for NATO not to expand into such a vacuum and consolidate the former Warsaw Pact under NATO leadership. And for it's just it's very disingenuous of Russia or other observers to say that NATO is malevolently expanding its influence at the expense of the former Soviet Union.
there was never any written document of United States promising of non-expansion. Because even if there would be one, then United States would make a statement. At that time, we had a policy of not expanding NATO to farther east. However, the situation now is different, and we decided to expand to east. If there would be a genuine agreement not to, but there was not. There was a maybe at the best. First of all, maybe it's not all true and all lies anyway. So I tend to believe if there is something, because quite a lot of people mentioned that there was a talk about it or so on. So it was a drunk talk between Bush Sr., whom I'm not impressed for several reasons, and whoever was at the power at the time, whether Gorbachev or I think Gorbachev, because it was shortly after Gorbachev agreed to get Germany united. So maybe it was at that time when something of that had place, but there is no substance, there is no document, there is nothing. It's all just stupid talk. That's the best what it could be. Jonathan, I think we have a very interesting conversation. We forgot to mention, so I'm sorry to mention that Ukraine is doing very successful probing of Russian positions, and very soon it will find the vulnerabilities there. Um, I'm a little bit disappointed that a lot of the media, both in Ukraine, by the way, and the West, that they are saying that the Ukrainian attack is too slow, and they were hoped that it would do much faster and much more substantial, and so on. I think this is very, very unproductive talk, because under the circumstances, when Ukraine doesn't have ATACMS, it doesn't have F-16s fighter jets, they are doing a brilliant job of weakening Russian positions. They're killing every day, on average, minimum 600 Russian soldiers, and sometimes more. They are destroying enormous number of tanks, artillery units, and so on. So I think it's just a matter of time when Russia, especially after this Prigozhin affair, will be in a position to have any meaningful answer to that. Well, in the meantime, I would like to thank you so much, Jonathan, for today's program, and hope on Tuesday, Ivan from Kiev, Ukraine, will join us. Slava Ukraini! Glory to Ukraine!